Hello everyone. Welcome back to Naruto Fix. Today we have another interesting what if Naruto story. Which is what if Naruto and Jiraiya never met each other. Part 1. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this content. Now, without wasting any time, let's begin. The first time Naruto Uzumaki failed a basic jutsu, no one laughed harder than the silence that followed. Because there was no one to defend him. No one to step in later and say, "You've got potential, kid." Quote. No one like Jiraiya. In this world. They never met. No accidental encounter. No shared journey. No mentor who would look past Naruto's failures and see something worth believing in. And that changed everything. Naruto still grew up alone in Konoha. Still ignored. Still judged. But something subtle was different. Without Jiraiya, Naruto never learned how to laugh through the loneliness. He learned how to endure it. Quietly. At the academy, Naruto didn't shout as much. Didn't pull as many pranks. Didn't chase attention the same way. Because over time, he realized something. No matter what he did, no one really saw him. So instead of trying harder, he stopped trying at all. What's the point? He muttered once, staring at his unfinished transformation jutsu. No one heard him. Because no one was listening. When Iruka Umino looked at him, he still saw the same struggling student. But something deeper. He missed. Because Naruto wasn't just failing anymore. He was withdrawing. And that was far more dangerous. Graduation day came. Naruto still stole the scroll of seals. Still learned the shadow clone jutsu. But even that moment felt different. When Iruka finally acknowledged him, when he said those words, Naruto didn't cry. He just nodded. Thanks. Because it didn't hit the same. Because without someone like Jiraiya later to reinforce that bond, that moment faded faster than it should have. Team 7 formed. Naruto, Sasuke Uchiha, and Sakura Haruno under Kakashi Hatake. At first, everything seemed normal. Naruto still argued with Sasuke. Still tried to prove himself. But something was missing. That wild, unshakable belief that he could surpass everything. Without Jiraiya's influence, Naruto didn't dream as big. He still wanted to be Hokage. But it felt more like a distant idea. Not a burning goal. The Land of Waves mission changed him. But not in the same way. Facing death. Seeing Zabuza. Watching Haku fall. Naruto felt anger. Felt confusion. But not clarity. Because there was no one later to help him process it. No one to explain the shinobi world in a way he could understand. So instead, those experiences stayed unresolved. They built up. Quietly. During the Chunin exams, Naruto still fought. Still pushed forward. But his growth was slower. Unrefined. Because he lacked guidance. When he faced Neji, his words weren't as strong. People can change, he said. But even he didn't fully believe it. Because no one had shown him how. Then came Orochimaru. And this was where things truly changed. Without Jiraiya, there was no one to recognize the deeper danger early. No one to monitor Naruto's connection with Kurama closely. When the seal weakened, Naruto felt it. That power. Raw. Uncontrolled. And instead of guidance, he faced it alone. Inside him, Kurama laughed. So no one came to help you. Naruto didn't respond. Good. Quote. That word echoed. Because now, Kurama had more influence. Not full control, but more access. And Naruto didn't know how to resist it properly. Training never came. No Rasengan. No control exercises. No lessons about balancing power. Because the one person who was supposed to teach him was never there. And slowly, Naruto began relying on something else. Not skill, not strategy, but power. Raw, unfiltered, dangerous. At first, it worked. Enemies fell. Missions succeeded. But each time, Naruto lost a little more control. A little more restraint. Until he didn't notice it anymore. Sasuke did. "You're changing," Sasuke Uchiha said one day. Naruto shrugged. "I'm just getting stronger." But that wasn't true. He wasn't getting stronger. He was getting dependent on something that didn't care about him. Kurama's voice became more frequent. More present. "You don't need them. You don't need anyone." And slowly, Naruto started believing it. When Sasuke eventually left, Naruto still chased him. But not out of connection. Out of obligation. Because that's what he was supposed to do. Their fight at the Valley of the End was different. Naruto didn't hold back. But he also didn't reach out. "Come back," he said. But his voice lacked weight. Because he didn't fully understand what he was asking. Sasuke saw it. "You don't even know why you're here." And he was right. Naruto didn't. Because without Jiraiya, Naruto never truly understood bonds. Not deeply. Not enough. He fought harder. Used more power. But it wasn't enough. Because strength without understanding is incomplete. Sasuke left. And Naruto didn't scream. Didn't break. He just stood there. Silent. Because something inside him was already empty. Years passed. Naruto trained. But alone. Without direction. Without purpose. And when the world needed him most, Naruto Uzumaki wasn't the hero they expected. He was something else. Something unstable. Something dangerous. Because without Jiraiya, Naruto never learned how to carry his pain. He only learned how to bury it. And buried pain always finds a way back. Stronger. Darker. And one day, it would come out. Not as anger. Not as sadness. But as something far worse. Something that wouldn't try to save the world. But question whether it deserved saving at all. And when that day came, no one would be ready. Because the boy who was supposed to become the light of the shinobi world never learned how to shine. Naruto didn't realize when the change became permanent. There wasn't a single moment where everything snapped. No dramatic turning point where he chose darkness over light. It was slower than that. Quiet. Almost invisible. Naruto Uzumaki simply adapted to what he had. Power without guidance, emotion without direction, and a mind that learned to suppress rather than understand. At first, the village didn't notice. Missions were still completed. Threats were still handled. And Naruto, despite his rough methods, was effective. But something about him began to feel distant. Not cold like Sasuke. Not angry like before. Just disconnected. Like he was present physically, but not fully there. Even Kakashi Hatake picked up on it. "You're relying on it too much," Kakashi said one day after a mission where Naruto had tapped into Kurama's chakra without hesitation. Naruto shrugged. "It works." That answer was wrong. Not because it was false, but because it was incomplete. Inside him, Kurama watched everything unfold with growing satisfaction. Without interference, without someone like Jiraiya teaching Naruto balance, Kurama didn't need to force anything. He didn't need to break the seal or take control. He just needed to wait. "You see it now," Kurama whispered. "Power solves everything." Naruto didn't respond. But he didn't reject it either. That silence was agreement. Time passed, and Naruto's growth became undeniable. He was stronger than most shinobi his age, faster, more durable, capable of overwhelming opponents through sheer force alone. But that strength came at a cost. His techniques lacked refinement. His control remained inconsistent. And his decisions became more reactive. During missions, Naruto began choosing the fastest solution rather than the best one. If something could be solved with overwhelming force, he used it. If an enemy resisted, he escalated. If things became complicated, he simplified them, often by destroying the problem entirely. At first, it worked. Until it didn't. One mission changed everything. A simple escort assignment. Routine. Low risk. But halfway through, they were ambushed. Not by powerful enemies. Just desperate ones. Rogue shinobi trying to survive. Naruto reacted instantly. Too fast. Too strong. By the time it was over, the threat was gone. And so were the people they were protecting. Silence filled the aftermath. Not shock. Not chaos. Just stillness. Naruto stood there, breathing steady, his hands relaxed, as if nothing had gone wrong. They got in the way, he said. That line was the breaking point. Sakura Haruno stepped back slightly, her expression unreadable but tense. Naruto. She didn't know what to say. Because this wasn't the Naruto she knew. Even Kakashi didn't respond immediately. Because this wasn't just a mistake. This was a shift. You need to stop, Kakashi finally said. Naruto frowned slightly. Stop what? That question proved everything. Because Naruto didn't see the problem. Inside him, Kurama's voice returned. See, they're weak. They hesitate. You don't. Naruto closed his eyes briefly. Not to resist, but to think. And when he opened them again, there was less hesitation. Back in Konoha, reports began to change. Naruto's missions were successful, but his methods were questioned. His results were effective, but his judgment was inconsistent. Whispers began. Quiet at first, then louder. He's not stable. Something's wrong with him. He's becoming dangerous. Naruto heard them, but didn't react. Because part of him agreed. Not that he was dangerous, but that he was different. And in his mind, different meant better. One evening, standing alone at the edge of the village, Naruto looked out at the horizon, his expression calm, almost empty. If this is what it takes, he said quietly, then I'll keep going. No doubt. No hesitation. Because without Jiraiya, no one had ever taught him where the line was. And now, he had already crossed it. The worst part, he didn't even know it existed. And far ahead, the consequences of that path were already forming. Because a Naruto without guidance, without balance, without someone to show him what strength truly meant, was not a hero. He was a force. And forces don't choose. They act. And when they act, everything in their path changes. For better. Or for worse. And the world was about to find out which one Naruto had become. The change didn't explode. It settled in. After that mission, the reports didn't stop, but Naruto stopped reading them. Naruto Uzumaki didn't argue with Kakashi, didn't try to justify himself to Sakura Haruno, and didn't confront the whispers spreading through Konoha. He simply adjusted. He took fewer words into missions. Fewer risks that relied on teamwork. More control over the field. More reliance on power. At first glance, it looked like growth. Naruto became faster at ending conflicts. Enemies were subdued in seconds. Ambushes failed before they fully began. He didn't hesitate, didn't second guess, didn't overthink. But what looked like efficiency was actually removal. He was removing variables, removing unpredictability, removing anything that complicated outcomes. And that included people. Kakashi saw it clearly. One evening, after a mission report that felt too clean, too precise, Kakashi Hatake called Naruto to the training field. Naruto arrived on time. Not late. Not distracted. That alone was unusual. You've improved, Kakashi said. Naruto nodded slightly. I know. That answer didn't sound proud. It sounded factual. Kakashi studied him for a moment. But you're not the same. Naruto tilted his head slightly. Is that a problem? That question carried no emotion. Kakashi didn't answer immediately. Because the answer wasn't simple. It depends, Kakashi finally said. On what you're becoming. Naruto looked away slightly, toward the edge of the field. Someone who doesn't fail. That line was quiet, but absolute. Kakashi's gaze sharpened. And what happens to everything else? Quote. Naruto didn't respond. Because in his mind, there was no everything else. Only outcomes. That night, Naruto didn't sleep. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't need to. Inside him, Kurama watched with growing interest. You're learning, Kurama murmured. Not through words. Through results. Naruto sat still, eyes open, staring into nothing. They slow things down, he said. A pause. Emotions. Kurama didn't laugh. Didn't mock. Then stopped using them. Silence. Because that suggestion didn't feel wrong. Naruto closed his eyes briefly. Not rejecting it. Considering it. Days passed. Then weeks. Naruto's missions increased. Not because he requested them. But because he was effective. Villages began requesting Konoha send that shinobi. The one who finished missions without complications. The one who didn't leave loose ends. Naruto became known. Not as a hero. But as a solution. That reputation spread quietly, but it reached places it shouldn't have. Far from Konoha, hidden in the shadows of a ruined temple, a pair of eyes opened. Cold. Calculating. So the Nine-Tails brat has changed, said Orochimaru softly. A faint smile formed. Interesting. Because this Naruto was no longer predictable, and unpredictability was something Orochimaru valued. Back in Konoha, Sakura approached Naruto again. Not as a teammate. Not as someone joking or arguing. But as someone concerned. You're avoiding us, she said quietly. Naruto didn't deny it. I'm focusing. Quote. Sakura frowned. On what? Naruto looked at her. What matters? That answer didn't reassure her. Because she realized. She didn't know if she was included in that anymore. Naruto. She started. But stopped. Because she didn't know what to say. How do you reach someone who doesn't feel the same way anymore? Naruto turned slightly. You don't need to worry. His voice was calm. I'm stronger now. Quote. That line should have been comforting. But it wasn't. Because it didn't sound like Naruto. It sounded like someone trying to justify something. Later that night, Kakashi met with Tsunade. He's changing too fast, Kakashi said. Tsunade leaned back slightly, her expression serious. Because he's doing it alone. A pause. And no one is correcting him. That word, correction, was important. Because Naruto wasn't wrong in everything. But he was unbalanced. And without someone to guide him, that imbalance would grow. We need to intervene, Kakashi added. Tsunade shook her head slightly. Not yet. A pause. If we push too hard, we'll lose him completely. Quote. Silence followed. Because both of them knew. That was already a risk. Meanwhile, Naruto stood alone again. At the edge of the village. Looking out. Not at anything specific. Just observing. If I remove mistakes, he said quietly, then nothing breaks. Inside, Kurama responded immediately. Exactly. That agreement came too easily. Naruto exhaled slowly. Then why does it still feel incomplete? That question was different. Because it wasn't logical. It was instinct. Kurama paused. For the first time, he didn't answer immediately. Because you're still holding on to something. Naruto frowned slightly. What? Quote. A pause. Them. That answer lingered. Because Naruto knew it was true. No matter how much he tried to simplify everything, to reduce outcomes to results, something still connected him to Sasuke, to Sakura, to the village. And that connection was unpredictable, which meant it was a flaw. Naruto's expression hardened slightly. Then I'll remove the two. That decision changed everything. Because once Naruto decided to remove emotional variables, he wasn't just becoming efficient. He was becoming something else. Something colder. Something more dangerous. And this time, there was no Jiraiya, no mentor, no guidance, no one to step in and say, "You're going too far." Quote. Because no one saw it clearly enough. Not yet. But soon. They would. Because the next mission would push Naruto beyond a point he couldn't return from. And when that happened, the boy who could have become the greatest hero would become something the world couldn't control. And by the time anyone realized it, it would already be too late. The next mission didn't look dangerous. That was the first mistake. It was listed as a high priority escort, sensitive cargo, diplomatic importance, but low combat expectation. Routine. On paper. Controlled variables. Clear path. Exactly the kind of mission Naruto Uzumaki preferred now. He accepted without hesitation. No questions. No discussion. Kakashi watched him leave the office, the faintest crease forming in his expression. Kakashi Hatake had seen countless shinobi grow, change, harden, but this felt different. Not growth. Optimization. And optimization, in the wrong direction, could erase more than it fixed. The team assigned was minimal. Naruto. 2 Chunin-level escorts. And the client. Naruto didn't speak during the journey. Didn't engage in conversation. Didn't check on morale. He scanned the environment. Mapped routes. Calculated risks. Everything became data. He's quiet, one of the escorts whispered. The other nodded. Just stay close. Naruto heard them, but didn't respond. Because communication wasn't necessary. Results were. They reached the midpoint of the route without incident. Terrain narrowed. Visibility reduced. A natural choke point. Naruto stopped. Not abruptly, but precisely. We're being watched, he said. No panic. No tension. Just fact. The escorts stiffened. Weapons ready. Where? One asked. Naruto didn't answer. Because the answer wasn't location. It was everywhere. Then, movement. Not chaotic. Not loud. Calculated. 5 figures. Rogue shinobi. Not elite. Not weak. Desperate. They surrounded the group. Hand over the cargo, one of them said. Voice rough. Controlled. They weren't looking for a fight. They were looking for survival. Naruto stepped forward slightly. Leave. One word. Flat. The leader frowned. We don't want trouble. Naruto didn't react. Then leave. The standoff held for a moment. Tension rising. Because both sides understood. This could end quickly. One way or another. The rogue leader exhaled. We're not backing down. That answer triggered the decision. Naruto moved. Not aggressively. Not dramatically. Efficiently. The first attacker disappeared before finishing his step. No impact. No sound. Just gone. The others reacted instantly. But it didn't matter. Naruto didn't chase. Didn't strike. Didn't escalate. He removed. Each movement. A correction. Each presence. Eliminated. Within seconds. The field was silent again. No bodies. No blood. Nothing. The escorts stood frozen. Because they didn't understand what they had just seen. What? What was that? One whispered. Naruto didn't answer. Because to him, nothing unusual had happened. Threat removed, he said calmly. The client stared at him. Not grateful. Terrified. Because whatever Naruto had done wasn't normal. The mission continued. No further interruptions. No complications. Perfect execution. Back in Konoha. The report was filed. Mission complete. No casualties. Threat neutralized. Clean. Too clean. Kakashi read it twice. Then a third time. Number traces? He asked. The reporting officer shook his head. None. A pause. They were just gone. Silence filled the room. Because that didn't fit. Tsunade leaned forward slightly, her expression tightening. Tsunade had seen dangerous techniques before. But this wasn't a technique she recognized. Bring Naruto in, she said. Naruto arrived minutes later. On time. Calm. Unchanged. Report. Tsunade said. Naruto nodded slightly. 5 hostiles. Minimal threat. Removed. Tsunade's eyes narrowed. Removed how? Naruto looked at her. Efficiently. That answer wasn't enough. Naruto. Kakashi said quietly. What exactly did you do? Naruto paused. Not because he didn't know. But because explaining it didn't make sense to him. I eliminated variables, he said. Silence. Because that wasn't an answer. It was a philosophy. Tsunade's voice hardened slightly. Those were people. Naruto didn't react. They were threats. That correction changed everything. Because Naruto didn't see them as individuals anymore. Just outcomes. Just risks. Just problems. Sakura, who had been standing quietly at the back, finally spoke. Naruto. That's not how this works. He looked at her. It worked. That response cut deeper than anything else. Because it was true. And that made it harder to argue against. Kakashi stepped forward slightly. You're losing something. Naruto frowned faintly. I'm gaining control. That difference was the problem. Because Naruto believed he was improving. But in reality, he was removing what made him human. Inside, Kurama smiled. Now you see it. A pause. Weakness isn't necessary. Naruto didn't respond. Because now, he agreed. Tsunade stood slowly. You're suspended from missions. Naruto blinked. Not shocked. Just confused. Why? That question confirmed everything. Because Naruto didn't understand the issue. Because you're not stable, Tsunade said firmly. Naruto's expression didn't change. I'm more stable than before. That answer was logical, but wrong. Sakura stepped forward. Naruto, please. Her voice softened. Just stop for a second. Naruto looked at her. And for a brief moment, something flickered. Recognition. Connection. But then, it faded. Stopping creates risk, he said. I won't do that. Silence. Because now, there was no misunderstanding left. Naruto had crossed the line. And he didn't even see it. He turned. If there's nothing else, Tsunade didn't stop him. Because she knew. This wasn't something that could be forced. Not anymore. Naruto walked out. Calm. Composed. Certain. But as he stepped outside, he paused. Just for a second. Because something inside him Didn't align. A feeling. Faint. Almost gone. But still there. Why? He murmured quietly. Does it feel wrong? Inside. Kurama answered instantly. Because you're not fully committed yet. A pause. Remove that too. Naruto stood still. Thinking. Calculating. Deciding. And slowly, his expression hardened. Because now, he understood what needed to be done. Not to the world, but to himself. And that decision would define everything that followed. Because once Naruto removed the last piece of hesitation, there would be nothing left to bring him back. And the world would face a shinobi unlike anything it had ever seen. Not driven by emotion, not guided by bonds, but by pure, unquestioned logic. And logic without humanity is the most dangerous force of all. The pause outside the Hokage building didn't last long. It resolved. Naruto didn't stay there wondering. He decided. Naruto Uzumaki stepped forward again, but something inside him had shifted permanently. The small hesitation he felt, that faint sense that something was off, was no longer being questioned. It was being removed. Inside him, Kurama watched carefully. Not forcing. Not pushing. Just guiding. Good. Kurama murmured. Now you understand. Naruto's expression remained calm. Emotion introduces error. A pause. Error leads to failure. Another step forward. Failure leads to loss. That chain was logical, clean, and completely flawed. But Naruto no longer questioned it. That night, Naruto didn't return home. He didn't go to Ichiraku. Didn't meet anyone. Instead, he went somewhere quiet. The training grounds. Not to train. To think. He stood in the center. Eyes closed, focusing not on chakra, not on techniques, but on himself. What he felt. What he remembered. And what he no longer needed. Memories. Naruto whispered. Images flashed. Iruka. Sakura. Sasuke. Moments. Laughter. Pain. Connections. Naruto's eyes tightened slightly. These create hesitation. Inside. Kurama's voice returned. Then discard them. Naruto didn't respond immediately. Because this was the final step. Not power. Not strength. Identity. If I remove this, Naruto said quietly, what remains? Kurama answered without hesitation. Strength. Silence. Because that answer was incomplete. But Naruto didn't see it that way. He took a slow breath. And then, something changed. Not outside. Inside. The memories didn't disappear. They faded. Not erased. But deprioritized. No longer guiding him. No longer influencing him. Just information. Naruto opened his eyes. And for the first time, they were completely still. No conflict. No hesitation. Just clarity. Done. That word marked the point of no return. Because now, Naruto wasn't conflicted. He was aligned. Perfectly. The next morning, Konoha felt it. Not through chakra. Not through presence. But through something else. A subtle shift. Like the world itself had adjusted. Kakashi noticed immediately. He changed again. Kakashi Hatake said quietly. Sakura looked confused. What do you mean? Kakashi's gaze hardened slightly. This time, it's complete. That answer didn't reassure anyone. Meanwhile, Naruto walked through the village. Not avoided. Not watched. But noticed. Because something about him felt different. Not threatening. But distant. Like he was there. But not part of it. People stepped aside instinctively. Not out of fear. But uncertainty. Naruto didn't react. Didn't acknowledge it. Because it didn't matter. He reached the gates. Stopped. Not because he was unsure. but because this was a decision point. Stay or leave. Naruto looked back once at Konoha, at everything he used to care about, and felt nothing. Not pain, not attachment, just recognition. I don't belong here anymore. That statement was calm, final, and with that, Naruto stepped forward, leaving the village, not as a rogue, not as an enemy, but as something else, something the shinobi world had never seen. A shinobi without emotion, a force without bias, a being driven only by outcome. And far away, in the shadows, Orochimaru smiled. Now this is interesting. Because the Naruto who once needed guidance had become something no one could guide anymore. And the world was about to face the consequences of that. Because without Jiraiya, Naruto didn't become weaker. He became something far more dangerous. Something that didn't save people. Something that didn't protect bonds. Something that didn't hesitate. And when something like that decides to act, there's no stopping it, only surviving it. And soon, the shinobi world would have to try. Naruto didn't look back again. Not when he crossed the gates. Not when the village disappeared behind him. Not even when the wind shifted, carrying faint echoes of a place that once meant everything to him. Naruto Uzumaki walked forward without hesitation, each step steady, controlled, and completely free of doubt. The road ahead wasn't uncertain to him anymore. Because uncertainty required emotion. And he had already removed that. Behind him, Konoha slowly realized what had happened. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But gradually. Sakura Haruno was the first to notice something was wrong. Not because Naruto said goodbye, but because he didn't. The silence he left behind felt heavier than any words ever could. He's not here, she whispered. Kakashi didn't need confirmation. He already knew. Kakashi Hatake stood quietly, his gaze distant, his expression more serious than usual. We were too late. That truth settled heavily. Because Naruto didn't leave in anger. Didn't leave in pain. He left in clarity. And that made it irreversible. Tsunade gave the order soon after. Not loudly. Not emotionally. But firmly. From this moment on. A pause. Naruto Uzumaki is no longer acting under Konoha's command. Quote. Not labeled a criminal. Not declared an enemy. But no longer theirs. Because deep down, they still hoped. But hope was something Naruto no longer carried. Far away, the world stretched wide and unguarded. Villages, nations, conflicts, all filled with imperfection, all filled with error. And now, Naruto saw it clearly. So many flaws, he murmured. Not with frustration, not with anger, but with observation. Because to him, this wasn't chaos. It was inefficiency. And inefficiency could be corrected. Inside him, Kurama remained silent for once. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he didn't need to. Naruto had already reached the conclusion on his own. That made it stronger, more permanent. Naruto stopped at the edge of a cliff overlooking a distant land, his gaze steady, his presence calm, but undeniably heavy. I understand now, he said quietly. A pause. What needs to be done? That sentence carried no emotion, but it carried something far worse. Purpose. Because Naruto no longer questioned the world. No longer tried to belong in it. He was going to change it. Not as a hero. Not as a villain. But as something beyond both. A force that didn't save. A force that didn't hate. A force that simply acted. And far behind him, in Konoha, they felt it. Not as fear, but as loss. Because the boy who once promised to become Hokage. The one who fought for bonds, for people, for recognition. Was gone. Not dead, but unreachable. And what remained was something far more dangerous. Because you can fight anger. You can resist hatred. But you cannot reason with something that feels nothing. And Naruto Uzumaki no longer felt anything at all. The wind passed by him once more. But this time, it didn't carry warmth. It carried silence. Because the world was about to face a shinobi who didn't belong to it anymore. And when he finally decided to act, there would be no hesitation. No second chances. No one to stop him. Because the one person who could have guided him was never there. And now, it was too late.